Hi, I'm Jeff Stark. In the days and weeks and months ahead, I'm going to be starting to upload a new series of videos titled Destructive Dating. And the reason why I'm putting those two words together is I'm going to be explaining to you from my dating experience why it was so difficult and why it was actually even destructive. And I also want to add that I found that my experience was not unique to myself, but it was also something that was universally common among the people that I knew, my friends, and the people that I associated with. But let's get started. Looking back in my dating experience, I began to realize that dating typically would involve six very different stages: stage one, two, three, four, five, six. In my experience, which included my dating in junior high, as early as junior high, and high school, of course, and college, and even post college, that my dating experience involved all six of these phases or stages, if you want to call it that. And I'd like to look at that a little bit more closely with you right now. And at the end of our time together, I think it'll become evident why I said earlier why I'm titling these uploading videos Destructive Dating. Okay, I discovered that dating really involves six stages. Stage number one would be that I'm not dating anybody, I'm not a boyfriend, I'm not anybody's boyfriend, I don't have a girlfriend, but I'm interested in finding somebody like that. And but I'm looking around and hoping that one day soon I might be able to be somebody's boyfriend, and I would hope that I would be able to be somebody's girlfriend. And in the process of that, I would go out with various girls at various times to various places and doing various things. So I'm kind of in the lonely but looking stages of trying to find a girlfriend. The second stage is that I find somebody and we begin to date each other. I like her a lot. It's apparent that she likes me a lot. And so we become somewhat exclusive, or in other words, at this point, I she's not going to be dating others, and I'm not going to be dating either others as well. We're kind of pairing off with one another in these early stages of dating and getting to know each other, but liking one another and being content to date only one another and not others as well. Stage number three is when at some point this lady friend of mine and I begin to, it may be verbal, it may be unverbal, but at some point we begin to define ourselves verbally, perhaps, boyfriend and girlfriend. We've enjoyed each other's company. We've enjoyed dating. We find that we have a lot in common. We're not interested in other people. And so we really decide to become boyfriend and girlfriend, and we make a commitment to one another, and we're going to be exclusive. There's a commitment that goes with that, and we're going to be exclusive with one another. And that is to say, we're making an agreement that I'm not interested in dating other girls, and I'm not going to. She's not going to be dating other boys, and agreeing to that as well. And as we became known to the community that we are now boyfriend and girlfriend, committed and exclusive. Guys are no longer permitted to ask her if she wants to go out on a date, and girls understand now that I'm exclusive with this young lady who I'll call Cindy, just to give her a name. And so we're treating this like an exclusive commitment relationship with each other. And my friends as well are treating it as such as well. And that's stage number two. Now, that kind of relationship can last weeks, it can last months, it can even last years, actually. But let's just take in my case, let's say that Cindy and I have become boyfriend and girlfriend. We've entered into the second stage of exclusivity and commitment. We're treating it that way. Others are treating it that way. And we've been dating now for 6 months. But stage number three, something begins to change. And that is, I start to notice that my girlfriend named Cindy, she's not paying much attention to me these days. Whereas we would typically maybe walk home after school together, Cindy's nowhere to be found. Um, Cindy's not returning my phone calls. we would meet over lunch and have lunch with various people together, of course, but with other people. And Cindy's no longer eating lunch in the same location that I'm eating. And this is very strange behavior. And the more that this takes place, and the longer this takes place, and she's not communicating with me, she's not returning my calls, I'm beginning to get weak-kneed. I'm beginning to feel worried and anxious and insecure, thinking perhaps she doesn't want to do this anymore. I'm thinking this is going to be really painful if I've got to go through that. And finally, I corner Cindy. I go to her house. I look for her out of her classroom. I write her a note, please meet me in such and such a place. I need to talk to you after school. And eventually Cindy agrees to meet with me, and I say, look, I miss you, and what's happening here? Our relationship has changed. I feel like, are you still interested? Are we still committed? And at that point, Cindy explains to me what could be a half a dozen different things. She's found a different guy that she wants to date. She really doesn't want to date me any longer. Life has become really busy and she can't do this with me anymore. Her parents want us to break up. There's a host of reasons, excuses, rationalizations, or just explanations as to why Cindy no longer wants to be exclusive with me. She does say, I hope this doesn't hurt you and I still want to be friends with you. Does that sound familiar? But in any event, Cindy wants to break up. Well, I remember one time I had a Cindy, it wasn't her name, but I did have a Cindy who wanted to break up with me, and I was very hurt by that. And I remember walking home or getting home and thinking about that. I called Cindy and I say, why are we doing this? What did I do that I should not have done? What did I not do that I should have done? How can I correct this? Cindy's very patient in explaining to me, maybe saying, Jeff, it's not you, it's other circumstances, things like that. And we hang up and I think more about it. I think more about it again. I call her again. Look, what can I do? And Cindy's patient and says, there's no reason to call me back anymore. This is a final decision. And but I still want to be your friend. Well, that might happen 2 or 3 times, but eventually I get the message. And we break up. Stage 4 is we break up and we're no longer boyfriend and girlfriend. Cindy's off doing her thing. But I enter into a different stage now, a new stage, and it's stage number 5. And that is, I am very, very, very hurt. And I'm very, very, very depressed. I feel like my heart's been yanked out and stomped on. I feel like I've been betrayed. I'm very, very hurt. I'm extremely lonely. I'm very down. I'm very depressed. I remember, pause there for a moment. I remember one time in junior high when my Cindy broke up with me between Thanksgiving and Christmas. And I remember calling her and asking her and probably even begging her to come back and date me, but she was very insistent eventually, and I understood there was no way to correct this. And I was just beside myself in sorrow and depression. I remember just wandering around the house, just downcast and brokenhearted. And I was not a man who I was not at that point mature enough to cry. I stuffed it all down inside, but I was dying on the inside. It was the worst Christmas I had ever experienced in my young life. Well, that was stage number 5, and it was a very, very, very depressing Christmas. I remember it very, very clear, even 60 years later. And so that's stage number 5 for me, and there was no consoling me. But as things go on, I entered into stage number 6 over time. I began to heal. I began to become okay. I regrouped. The depression began to go away, and I healed from that particular situation. But it was a long process and a very painful one. Pause there for a moment, and I remember a time after college where the girl that I wanted to date and wanted to be her boyfriend, she basically said to me, "We're not going to do this. I can't be your girlfriend." And that was devastating to me. And I remember that happening sometime around May, I think it was. And I had to go home for the summer in June and July and August. I remember I cried every day. I would get in my car and drive to the construction site, and I would cry, and I'd get home. I'd be depressed there, and I'd get in the car and come home. And I remember crying all summer long, just depressed and discouraged and sad. But come September and October, November, I was healing and becoming myself again, and becoming normal and healed, and been able to move on in a healthy sort of a way. And that's stage number 6. But then what happened, I began to realize, was eventually I got into stage number 1, where I'm okay, I'm healthy, it's over, and I'm past it, and I would like to find someone else to date. And then I enter back into stage number 1, where I'm lonely and I'm going out with other girls, getting to know them, but crossing my fingers and hoping that I will be able to find someone of whom I can enter into a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship again. Now, that particular experience happened to me over the course of those junior high school, college, and post-college. Girls broke up with me probably, I would say 2 or 3 or 4 times. I'm not specific about that, I can't remember. But it happened multiple times, and it happened all the same way. I would go through those phases. Eventually she'd say, "I want to break up," and I would go into depression, and then eventually I would heal. And then maybe 6 months later, I'm dating and going around, and then I would loop through that particular 6 stages again. Now, at the end of that stage, sometimes I was the boyfriend saying to Cindy, in this case, "I don't want to do this anymore," with the same rationales or excuses or justifications or simple explanations as to why I didn't want to do this anymore. And then most of the time, Cindy would go into her own phase number 6 and enter into a season of depression as well, as I moved on and did what I was going to do. That happened to me about 3 or 4 times, and I know 2 or 3 times I broke up with girls, and they experienced the same stage number 6 that I did, and that is that stage of depression and discouragement and sadness and grief and sorrow that I similarly experienced. Now, here's what I began to realize. By the way, that happened to me as a non-Christian, but I became a Christian, and that happened also to me as a Christian. Same experience, identical experience that I experienced as a non-Christian dating through those 6 stages. Those same things happened to me once or twice after becoming a Christian, going through the very same stages, and even as a Christian entering into that depressive state that I did as a non-Christian. Now, at some point after college, and as I was probably now in my 20s, of course, in my probably early to mid-20s, as a Christian who was very committed to Christ and wanting to understand the scriptures and enjoying the Christian life and the abundant life that was promised by virtue of the presence of the Holy Spirit and the promises of the scriptures. I began to look at this matter, these 6 stages, and I realized that this was something that not only was I going through with my girlfriends, but I looked around at my non-Christian friends, and I was looking around at my Christian friends, and they were experiencing the very same things that I had experienced. My non-Christian friends were going through those 6 stages, and I would find my friends who were broken up with their girlfriends going through the same season of depression that I did. And as a Christian, I saw Christians going through those same stages as well. Sometimes, rarely, they would go on to marriage, but there was probably 4 or 5 times that they would date and break up to the one time that it would end up in marriage. But they were going through the same stages in their dating relationships, ending up in stage number 6 as well as a Christian going through depression. And they were experiencing the same things that I was experiencing. both non-Christian and Christians as well. And I began to ask myself the question, Lord, this is just really weird to me. Why are we going through this experience, non-Christian and Christians? And at that particular point in time, in the Christian community, as best that I can remember it, there was really only one guideline, one truth, one principle, one prohibition that was known by all, and that is, if you were going to be dating somebody, you were not to be having premarital sex with that person. You were not to live with that person, and you were not to have premarital sex with that person. That was the only guideline that I remember ever hearing. Somehow, I don't remember being taught, but it kind of trickled down eventually that I understood, well, I'm not to have sex with this person. And of course, the conversation was, well, if we're not to have sex, can we kiss? Can we make out? Can we fondle? Can we get naked? All that bantering back and forth in the Christian community, the single community. But nonetheless, the one thing that was laid out for us as singles was, don't have premarital sex. And of course, you can't live together. That's for married people. So I stepped back and began to ask myself the question, why are we going through this? And Lord, is there anything in your word that talks to us about dating? About how we're to go through this transitional period of being a single person to dating, to being engaged and entering into marriage? Are there scriptures in our Bibles that apparently nobody seems to understand, because I'm not hearing it? I don't know anybody else who is saying that. I'm not even knowing anybody who's asking that question, quite honestly. And so I begin to look into the scriptures and study the scriptures. And what God reveals to me is miraculous and wonderful. He does give us instruction and guidance, clear, biblical, healthy, helpful, constructive guidelines as to how God wants us to go through this transition. Is God interested in how we go through this transition? I came away saying he is very interested, very invested, and very interested about how his people go through that transition from singleness into marriage. And secondly, he has laid down very sufficient and comprehensive and deep guidelines and teachings that we can adhere to as we go through this process and go through it in a way that honors him, in a way that's very different than what I've described for you in terms of what I did as a non-Christian and as a Christian. How to go through it in a way that honors him, in a way that's very constructive and not destructive, and in a way that can end well for both parties if they happen to become interested in one another. So God is very interested in how we go through this transition, and he has given us a lot of truth in the scriptures that we can look to and apply so that we can go about it the way that he wants us to, in a way that's very, very different and very, very constructive, and in a way that is not destructive. Now, in our subsequent videos, what we're going to do is look at why that formula, those 6 stages, ends up in such a destructive, depressive way. And what are some of the things that God can teach us by way of scriptures as to how he would have us do things very, very differently. Now, we're going to unpack it. It's going to take time to do that. But by the end of these videos, you're going to understand the way that I was going about it as a non-Christian, even as a Christian without much information, was very destructive and very sinful. Very, very sinful, I might add. And that God has a very, very different way and a very constructive way about going through it in the way that he's going to teach us in the scriptures that I'm going to unravel for us in the videos ahead. So, I suspect that I'm talking to people who have gone through the dating experience, and I would suspect that everyone who has gone through a dating sort of experience like I did growing up, they are very, very similar. They are very familiar, I should say, with these 6 stages. But that's all they know. And they're listening to this saying, you know what, that was my experience. I'm going through it right now. But I don't understand how God would have us do it differently. Well, I'm looking forward to passing along to you who are going through it now or who have gone through it and have questions about what's wrong with it and how are we to do it differently. Well, stay tuned for the videos number 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 that are soon to be uploaded that'll guide us and bring us to a very, very different understanding as to how God would have us go through this transition as opposed to how the world has laid out for us to go through this transition that's very, very destructive. So, if you're interested, stay tuned. If you know people who would enjoy learning about this as well, give them this channel's address, and they too will profit from our times together as well. Okay, look forward to being with you in video number 2, titled Dating, Destructive Dating number 2. See you then.